Most people think crime scene evidence is collected to solve the case in front of investigators that day. But in Tampa in August of 1983, evidence collected from a murder scene waited nearly 4 decades for science to catch up. When it did, it exposed a wrongful conviction, cleared a man who had spent nearly 37 years in prison, and helped investigators identify and indict 2 suspects responsible. Crime scene integrity is not just about winning today's case. It's about protecting evidence for questions that science may not be able to answer yet. I'm Chris, and this is Eagle Eye on Crime. In our new series, we look at a Florida case that happened during the month we are reporting, and then break down the criminal justice lesson behind it. For August, we're examining the murder of 19-year-old Barbara Grams in August of 1983 in Tampa. The lessons from this case matter far beyond Tampa. A 2023 review examined 732 exoneration cases that had already been flagged for false or misleading forensic evidence. It found forensics-related case errors in 635 of those 732 cases. Nearly 87%. This shows how often flawed, overstated, or poorly understood forensic evidence can become part of a wrongful conviction case. So let's dive into the facts. At 8 o'clock on the morning of August 19th, 1983, Barbara Grams was found behind a dental office in Tampa Heights. Barbara had finished her shift at the hot potato restaurant the night before. She was seen walking home shortly after 9 o'clock p.m. By morning, she had been beaten to death. Her body was found about 2 miles from the restaurant where she had worked. She was nude except for a tube top that had been pulled below her chest. She had been beaten about her face, and she was covered in blood from scrapes and tears on her neck. She also had bruises on her limbs that appeared to have been made by the pressure from the attacker's fingers. Investigators collected physical evidence from the scene, including biological evidence during the autopsy, fingerprints, hair, blood, and materials believed to be connected to the attack. At the crime scene, the police found several pieces of 2x4 lumber with blood and hair attached. Police believe these were the murder weapons. Dr. Lee Miller, the Hillsborough County Medical Examiner, performed the autopsy on August 20th. He concluded that Miss Grams had died from blunt force trauma to the head, most likely around 11:30 p.m. on August 18th. He collected materials for a rape kit, as well as hair, blood, and fingernail scrapings. In addition, he collected vaginal samples of what he called a white fluid. Dr. Miller would later testify that he noticed what he believed to be a bite mark on Miss Grams' left cheek as he was washing blood from the woman's face. He stopped his washing and then swabbed the area with a saline solution to potentially collect saliva that might have been left by her attacker. At the time, forensic DNA testing was not yet available to help investigators identify or exclude a suspect. So the case would take another forensic path, one that looked persuasive in court, but would later collapse under scientific review. Investigators believe they found a clue on Barbara's face in what they called a bite mark. That conclusion would become central to the case against 18-year-old Robert DuBoise. Dr. Miller summoned Dr. Richard Powell, a local dentist who had been listed as a forensic odontologist by Dr. Miller's office. Although Dr. Powell was not certified in this specialty, this case would actually be Dr. Powell's first consultation in a criminal case. Dr. Powell took a Polaroid photo of the mark and told Dr. Miller, the medical examiner, that it might be from someone missing upper front teeth, specifically a left front incisor. Dr. Powell said he could see tear marks in the skin. His opinion was that the 6 lower teeth of the person who left the bite mark had no gaps. Tampa police reached out to Dr. Richard Sovereign, a dentist in Coral Gables, Florida, who was a leading forensic odontologist. Dr. Sovereign advised Detective Saladino to use beeswax to make bite mark impressions from potential suspects. These molds would then be filled with a composite to make a hard cast that could then be compared against the photograph of Ms. Graham's cheek. As part of this process, the original beeswax mold was destroyed. Detective Saladino had access to beeswax because a police captain was a beekeeper. One report would later state that Detective Saladino and other officers might have created as many as 100 beeswax molds from potential suspects. Detectives began comparing dental impressions from several men, including an 18-year-old named Robert DuBoise. A forensic dentist eventually told investigators that DuBoise's teeth matched the mark on Barbara's face. But that wasn't the only evidence presented against him. A jailhouse informant later claimed DuBoise confessed to involvement in Barbara's murder. Now pause right here for a second. In 1983, forensic DNA was not available to help investigators identify or exclude a suspect. So, the case against Robert DuBoise rested heavily on a supposed bite mark and testimony from a jailhouse informant. He was convicted in March of 1985 and sentenced to death. Later, his sentence would be reduced to a life sentence. But through all of this, DuBoise maintained his innocence. In 2006, he asked the court for DNA testing because biological evidence had been collected during Barbara Graham's autopsy. The court was told that that biological evidence collected had been destroyed in 1990. His request was denied. For more than a decade, the case appeared to be over. But in 2018, the Innocence Project began investigating DuBoise's case. Its attorneys found concerns with that jailhouse informant testimony, as well as the bite mark analysis used to convict him. In 2019, they asked Hillsborough County's Conviction Review Unit to reopen the case. That review brought in a modern forensic odontologist, Dr. Adam Friedman, to examine the evidence that had been presented as a bite mark. His conclusion was devastating to the original case. The old bite mark identification was not supported by science. And even more startling, the injury on Barbara's face was not a human bite mark at all. Think about that. One of the central forensic conclusions used to convict an 18-year-old man was later found to be an incorrect interpretation of the injury itself. So investigators were left with a critical question. If science used to convict Robert DuBoise did not hold up, was there any physical evidence left that modern science could test? The answer to that question was almost nothing. The court had been told all biological evidence was destroyed, but it was not. In August 2020, 3 microscopic slides from Barbara Graham's rape kit were found at the Hillsborough County Medical Examiner's Office, where they had remained since 1983. 3 small slides, prepared before DNA testing was even available in criminal cases, were still there nearly 4 decades later. So those slides were sent for DNA testing, and the lab identified DNA from 2 male contributors. Robert DuBoise was excluded. So was his brother Victor and Raymond Garcia, the 2 men that Jailhouse informant had claimed were involved. That result did not just weaken the case against DuBoise, it literally dismantled it. The biological evidence that could finally be tested did not place him at the scene. It excluded him. On August 26th of 2020, DuBoise was released from prison. On September 14th, a judge vacated his conviction and the charges were dismissed. Nearly 37 years had passed since his arrest. He had spent 35 years incarcerated for Barbara Graham's murder. But that DNA, it didn't hand investigators a neat one-step answer about who killed Barbara. The first CODIS results identified a person with no connection to DuBoise. Therefore, investigators had to keep working. They re-examined the evidence, compared cases, and rebuilt the investigation around what the science could actually support. On August 4th, 2022, a Hillsborough County grand jury indicted Amos Robinson and Abron Scott in the murders of Barbara Graham's and an additional victim, Linda Lanson. Linda was another Tampa woman killed in 1983. The indictments were based in part on DNA evidence from the DuBoise case. In 2024, Abron Scott pleaded guilty to the murders of Barbara and Linda and received 2 additional life sentences. Get this, he was already serving a life sentence on an unrelated murder case. In total, he has been sentenced to 3 consecutive life terms. Amos Robinson, Scott's co-defendant, has not pled guilty. As of this recording, he is awaiting trial on the charges involving Barbara Graham's and Linda Lanson. Prosecutors are seeking the death penalty if he is convicted. So, what is the criminal justice lesson to this case? This is not a story about investigators in 1983 somehow failing because they didn't have DNA. They didn't have it yet. It is a story about the danger of treating forensic conclusion as more certain than the science allows. It is also a story about why evidence collection, documentation, packaging, and storage matter long after a case appears closed. Scene integrity is not just about winning today's case. It is about protecting evidence for questions that science may not be able to answer yet. Barbara Graham's deserved a thorough investigation. Robert DuBoise deserved a fair one. And the evidence that survived gave the justice system a chance, decades later, to move closer to both. What do you think is the biggest lesson here? The danger of overstating forensic science? The need to preserve evidence? Or the importance of reviewing old convictions when the science changes? Let me know in the comments. I'm Chris, and this is Eagle Eye on Crime. I'll see you next month for another Florida case and the criminal justice lesson behind it. Stay safe and stay curious.